Okay, just a couple comments before I introduce our speaker from the cemetery. The AVVBA and the Georgia National Cemetery have had a relationship for several years. Dan Holtz, a former board member and a past president, was one of the early chairmen of the Georgia National Cemetery Advisory Council. That's the civilian organization that supports cemetery operations. Ed Woods and I volunteer up at the cemetery every Monday. We help the families in the final steps on the day of the burial for their veteran or their spouse. As Skip alluded, this is not a happy topic to talk about, but I try to think of an analogy, and the closest I could come about hearing this kind of information is like being Hal Moore and being told you're going to be a battalion commander in the 7th Cavalry. It's intimidating. But as Joe Galloway said, he was successful because he prepared. You or someone you care about is going to have to deal with this stuff. Dealing with a loss is bad. Dealing with these decisions during a time of high stress and emotional vulnerability can be almost debilitating. Ed and I see many instances where families aren't prepared and they come up there and it's almost painful for them to go through this stuff. We asked to be able to present this information because of what we saw. We wanted you to think about the unthinkable and be prepared. Our speaker today is Johan Flores. He is an employee of the Georgia National Cemetery. He's also a Navy veteran of 8 years. Once he left the Navy, he worked in the Department of the Navy down at Key West for several years, and then in 2018, he was hired by the Georgia National Cemetery and is currently the lead cemetery representative, and he does a wide range, a variety of different duties at the cemetery. He deals with veterans and their families every day, and he's experienced, and he has a good depth of knowledge about what you need to know. So listen to what he has to say, think about it. You may not want to, but think about it and be prepared. Johan?
If you just hit that arrow, that'll flip your slide.
All right, thank you. Well, good morning. First of all, I appreciate you guys inviting me here today. First of all, also, I want to thank you guys all for your service to our nation. I myself serve our nation, like Tony said, for 8 years, and I'm a proud member of the Navy. I still consider myself a proud Navy of the Navy. And just like the Marines say, once a Marine, always a Marine. Well, guess what? Once a sailor, you're always a sailor. So I am going to go over some of the benefits that you guys have earned for your service. I am part of the Veterans Affairs under the National Cemetery Administration. The way that I like to explain that to everybody is just like the Department of Defense, you also have Navy, Marines, Air Force, and the Army. Well, the Veterans Affairs is the same way. We have the National Cemetery Administration, the Veterans Benefit Administration, and my nerves just got the best of me. I forgot the last couple ones. Anyways. So today, the topics for today is pretty much basic provisions of the burial benefits, your burial options, committal services, the required documents to determine eligibility, your burial allowances, disinterment request, casket and urn reimbursements. And keep that one in mind because there's specific things that you need to apply for that one. Memorial product services, the American Customer Service Index, and the scheduling office, and the eligibility and pre-need forms. About the NCA, there are currently 136 national cemeteries, 33 soldiers' lots, and monument sites. The funds to establish, expand, and maintain 110 state and tribal veterans cemetery, they all come from the National Cemetery Administration. In 2017, the VA honored more than 361,892 veterans and their loved ones with memorial benefits in national, state, tribal, and private cemeteries. The mission of the NCA, or the National Cemetery Administration, is to honor veterans and their families with final resting places in national shrines and with lasting tributes that commemorate their service and sacrifice to our nation. About Georgia National Cemetery. Our first burial took place in April of 2006. We are the only active national cemetery in the state of Georgia. I know you may be familiar with Marietta National. Marietta National is actually full. We only do subsequent burials, meaning second burials. We currently have 778 acres and 92 acres that are currently developed in Georgia National Cemetery. That will allow us to provide services for the next 50 to 80 years. Currently, we have a total of 26,550 interments currently at Georgia National Cemetery. We are currently scheduled for expansion in fiscal year 23. So we are getting bigger, and we are doing more services currently. Right now we do about 10 to 15 services a day, Monday through Friday. As far as what are your burial benefits, for veterans and their qualifying dependents, a burial plot, opening and closing of the plot, a grave liner, committal service, a headstone, marker or a niche cover, and the care of that gravesite. As far as for our veterans, in addition to all those above mentioned benefits, veterans are also entitled to a burial flag, military honors, and a presidential memorial certificate. What are your burial options? Well, currently in our cemetery, our options are casket burial, in-ground cremation, columbarium, which are the big white walls. I don't know if you guys ever been at the cemetery, but they're the big white walls that are currently at the cemetery. And we also have a scattering garden. As far as the three that are below the scattering garden, we don't offer those burial options at our cemetery, but they are options that you have in other national cemeteries throughout the U.S. What is allowed in a committal service? Well, anything that will honor the memory of our veteran or eligible dependent. When I say honor, of course, I mean in good taste. What are the components of military honors? Military honors are performed by our military branches. The honors are composed of the folding and presentation of the flag and the playing of taps. A lot of times I get the question, what about the 21 gun salute? Well, we're not burying the president. So, for a rifle salute, we do have veteran organizations that come over to the cemetery and they do the rifle salute, but it's only 3 volleys. So if the military is doing the rifle salute, it could be 12 shots that were fired, or it could be 21. It all depends on the branch of service. It's not something that everyone will get. You do have to either retire from the military or active duty, or either passed away during active duty. So not all of us will receive the 3 firing volleys. As far as service time limits, because of the number of services we do per day, we restrict the memorial or committal services to 20 minutes. We do services every 30 minutes in the cemetery. Again, 10 to 15 services a day, Florida National Cemetery actually does between 30 to 50 services in one day. So you guys, if you guys do a little bit of the math, it is a lot of work that we do on the background, so when the family does get to the cemetery, everything can go smooth. We do get some unique requests. That all depends on the operations of the cemetery on the day of the service. Some families would like to request the lowering, to witness the lowering of the casket into the gravesite. I like to advise my families that if operations of the cemetery allow for us to do that, then we will honor that request. We just have to keep in mind, again, the number of services that are being done throughout the day. Who coordinates all the services? I have 4 cemetery representatives under me, and they all do an amazing job as far as coordinating all the services and making sure that our families are taken care of. In addition to the cemetery representatives, we have our volunteers, who again, they do an amazing job taking care of our families when they walk in through our doors at the Public Information Center. This all combined allows us to serve the veteran and their families with respect and honor. Some of the required documents: a death certificate, a burial permit, cremation certificate, certificate of monument data. That one right there, we actually provide to you on the day of the service. That is a picture of what the headstone will look like. We actually call it a headstone verification form at the cemetery. This will give you a good idea of what the headstone of your loved one will look like as you come in for your loved one's service. The agreement for burial of cremated remains that only applies to cremations. And let's say, for example, you would like to split the cremains. You would like for us to bury part of the cremains of your loved one, and you would like to keep the rest. Well, then we'll have you fill out a statement for divided cremated remains. Now, that form, I like to explain to everyone that once you divide those cremains, you are agreeing that at a later time you will not try to bury the other half of the cremains at any other national cemetery. So once you do that, you won't be able to at a later time come back to us and say, hey, well, now I want the other half to be buried at the gravesite. Unfortunately, we will not be able to do that at that time. So just kind of keep that in mind when you do decide to split the cremains. Burial allowance. Who's eligible? Well, any eligible veteran and their dependent is eligible for a small burial allowance. Now, again, since the VA split into different branches, everything that I'm going to go over on this slide applies only to the benefits, the VA's benefits administration. So you will actually have to go through that branch of the VA in order to apply for those benefits. Let's see. And sorry for my silence. Now, the VA will pay an allowance of up to $2,000 to cover burial and funeral expenses if the veteran passed away from any eligible service-connected disability. Now, if the veteran did not pass away from any eligible service-connected disability, the VA will only pay up to $300. So it's a big difference between the two. What do you need in order to apply? Well, you do need a copy of the death certificate of the veteran or eligible dependent and a copy of the discharge document. You will also need to fill out VA Form 21 Papa 530. Once you fill out the form and have your copies and you put everything together, the form will actually tell you what to send the documents to. The VA's Benefit Administration will process your request and they will either direct deposit the benefit allowance to your checkings account, or they will mail you guys a check. It does take a while for you to receive it. It's not something that's going to happen right away, so it's always best to plan ahead when it comes to your burial allowances or covering any funeral expenses. That's a good question. How do you plan for a funeral? You can. What I tell everyone is start working with a funeral home now. What the funeral home will do is they will create a local file for you within the funeral home. So you provide them with a copy. You just walk in, let them know, hey, I'm a veteran. I would like to be buried at a national cemetery. Provide them with a copy of your DD-214 and any documents that they will require from you. So when that time comes that they need to make all the arrangements for you, they have everything that they need. They will actually handle everything for the family. The family doesn't have to take care of nothing. The funeral home will arrange military honors. They will contact our scheduling office, create the case for you guys, and they will do everything. So that's how you can plan ahead for a funeral service. Good question, by the way.
Can I ask another one?
Yes, sir.
I don't mean to interrupt. Are these benefits from the VA allowable if you are not buried in the national cemetery?
Yes. Yes.
Repeat the question and the answer.
Are these benefits allowable if you're not buried at a national cemetery? Now, some veterans already have family plots that they purchase on their own. The VA will actually provide a headstone at no cost to the family. They will also provide the burial allowance that we just spoke about. And they will also, if the veteran or the family member already has a headstone in place in that private lot, the VA will also provide a medallion. So these benefits not only apply when you are buried at a national cemetery, but they will also apply when you are buried in a private cemetery.
What is a medallion?
A medallion, I have actually a picture in here. If you look right there to your my right-hand side, or the right-hand side of the screen right there, that's a medallion. That's something that the VA will provide to be placed on the marker for any eligible veteran buried at a private cemetery. All right. So occasionally we do get requests from family members who move to different states and they would like for their loved ones' cremains or casket to be moved to that state. What we do is called a disinterment. The request has to be submitted to the cemetery director first, and there's a disinterment request form. Once I get done with the presentation, on the back of the room on the my right-hand side, I do have some information as far as all the forms I'm going to go over and examples of how those forms are filled out. You guys are more than welcome to take a look at them, but the disinterment request form gets filled out by the family, submitted to the cemetery, and the cemetery director will look over the form and approve the request. Now, are you able to, let's say, now that you move to a different state, relocate your loved one's cremains from one national cemetery to the other? Yes, you are. You are able to move your loved one's cremains from one national cemetery to the other. As far as the cost of relocation, the VA will not cover the cost. So if it's a move, if it's a casket move, that's something that the family will have to pay for out of pocket. The VA will not cover that cost from going from one national cemetery to the other. I believe I saw a question. All right. Yes, ma'am, I do. Is www.cem.va.gov. And again, a lot of the information I'm going over with you guys today is right there on the back on those tables. You guys are more than welcome to grab those guides that I brought in for you guys. Yes, sir.
What's the percentage of cremations versus caskets?
Percentage of cremations versus caskets.
It's actually hard to tell right now. Ever since the pandemic, we did have a rise on the number of caskets. If I had to give it a number, 60% cremations, 40% casket. But again, when it comes to caskets, we have to be more flexible with caskets. So when it comes to scheduling, we have more time slots available for caskets than cremations. The storage of a casket at a funeral home, it could be costly to the family. So we don't want to delay the interment any more than we have to. Right now, we are about 2 weeks out as far as scheduling the burial of a casket, and about 3-4 weeks when it comes to cremations. So that's why we have to have more slots as far as scheduling for available for caskets than actual cremations. But if I had to give it a number as far as the number that we currently have in the cemetery is about 60-40. As far as the disinterment, how quickly can it be completed? Well, is that as quickly as either the funeral home can make all the arrangements or the family can make all the arrangements. Once we receive the request and the request is approved by the director, we can complete the disinterment within 48 hours. All right, so earlier in my presentation, I did say keep the casket and urn reimbursement in mind. I do get that question a lot. The VA will not reimburse for the cost of a casket or the cost of an urn. The only reason they will do that is for veterans who are unclaimed. Those veterans who are unclaimed by family members, what the funeral home will do is they will fill out a VA form 40-10088, and they will submit that to the VA, and the VA will actually reimburse the funeral home who made all the arrangements for burial of that unclaimed veteran. So that's not something that applies to families. That is only something that applies to funeral homes who process the cremains or the burial of an unclaimed veteran. Memorial Product Service, they are actually in charge of processing all the orders for headstones. So once a burial takes place, we have a system that we go into and we place the order for the headstone. We actually have 7 days from the day of the burial to place the order of the headstone. We give families 3 days to decide what they would like for the headstone to have in front of it. So you do, on the upright headstone, you do have 1 line for the religious emblem and then 3 lines at the bottom of the headstone for the optional inscription. Again, we provide the family with 3 days for them to decide what they would like to go on the headstone, due to the fact that we only have 7 days to order the headstone. Once the headstone is ordered, it takes about 45 to 60 days from the day of order for the headstone to be placed at the gravesite. The American Customer Service Index is a survey that goes out every 3 years to all of our families. This service, it pretty much goes over what do you think about the cemetery, the staff, how is the committal service, the National Cemetery Administration, have they addressed any of your inquiries or any of your requests? How do they do that? How fast? All of that gets asked on this survey. Now, in 2016, we actually received a score of 96%. which is, at that year, it was the best in the nation from any federal government institution and even any private company. So that's an awesome job for the National Cemetery Administration. We do take our job real serious, and we do like to honor not only just the veterans, but their families, because the families also serve with the veterans, and that's something that we always try to keep that in mind. As you can see, 2013, 96%, 2010, 94, 2007, 95, and 2004, 95%. So we are always above 95, 94, 95, which that's something that we are all proud of. Now, as far as making arrangements for burial, just like every government office, we do have a headquarters, and that is the National Cemetery Scheduling Office. Like I mentioned earlier, the funeral home can make all the arrangements for you, as long as they have all the documents required. Discharge document, that marriage certificate if the veteran is married, or any other required documents that the National Cemetery Scheduling Office will require from them. What happens at the time of death is the funeral home will make the call to the National Cemetery Scheduling Office. They will also fax or email the required documents, and they will process their request. So they'll ask the basic questions: name of the veteran, social security number, branch of service, and they will pull the veteran service record. So even if you guys don't have a copy of your D-214 somewhere at home, don't worry about it, because of the fact that the National Cemetery Scheduling Office, as long as you provide the veteran's social security number, they will be able to pull the discharge document from the veteran. The National Cemetery Scheduling Office is actually right next door to the archives. There are times where they do have to walk over and physically pull the file of the veteran in order to determine eligibility. Now, how long does it take for the scheduling office to determine eligibility for burial? It could be done within 30 minutes if the scheduling office has everything that they need. Sometimes it takes a little bit longer. If they have to go over to the next building and pull the file, it takes about 72 hours for them to process the eligibility request. Once the eligibility comes good to go, they'll transfer the case over to the cemetery, and the cemetery will manage that case from that point on. Are there things that might get you disqualified from being buried at a national cemetery? Yes, there are. There are some things that will get you disqualified from being buried at a national cemetery. Any capital crime, any if you've been convicted of any sexual misconduct, things like that will get you disqualified from being buried at a national cemetery. Eligibility and preneed, I believe I just went over that a little bit. Now, the preneed form, the way that I like to explain the preneed form is like kind of getting pre-approval for a loan. So you fill out the form and you submit it to the preneed eligibility office. What they will do is they will pull your information, they will process your request, and then they will send you a letter in the mail. And that letter will read, at this time you are eligible to be buried at a national cemetery. At this time. If you commit any other crimes that I mentioned earlier, then you're going to be disqualified. But if you don't qualify to be buried at a national cemetery, it will also give you the reason why. Are you able to appeal that no? Yes. It will give you information on how to appeal that case, so that way you can submit your appeal and see if you can be request further review for approval. And they will do that. Sometimes it comes back, yes, now you are eligible. And sometimes they say, no, at this time you're still not eligible. Pre-need eligibility, which is VA Form 40-10007, applies mostly to those guys who were in the reserves and never retired from the reserves. So let's say you only did 5-6 years in the reserves, and you're not sure if you qualify to be buried at a national cemetery. One of the basic requirements to be buried at a national cemetery is before 1981, if you were drafted Vietnam or any others other wars, then you automatically qualify. After 1981, the basic requirement is 24 months of active duty time. So if you are a reservist who does not know if they qualify because you're not sure if you meet that 24 basic requirement, I suggest you fill out a pre-need eligibility form, get it submitted, and receive that letter in the mail. There are so many things that apply to deciding eligibility of a veteran. You might be surprised. If you're receiving a service-connected disability right now, and even if you don't meet the 24...
2010, we're at the Bears training camp in Bourbonnais, Illinois. And with us today we have...
Sorry, guy.
Cool, strong man.
So if you let's say you only had 12 months of active duty time, but you are currently receiving disability for a service-connected injury, you are still eligible. Again, there are so many different variables that apply to eligibility. I can't get into all of them. That's why we have an eligibility office, because they will look at the bigger picture and they'll give you guys a better answer than we at the cemetery or the local level can. So when I get those guys that come over to the cemetery and here's my DD-214, this is how long I served, well, my standard answer is, I'm sorry, but I can't determine eligibility at the local level. What I suggest you do is you fill out the pre-need eligibility form, get it submitted with a copy of your DD-214, and now you will receive a letter in black and white that says that you're eligible. I don't want to give any family the false hope that their loved one is going to be buried at a national cemetery. So I instruct all my guys to have them fill out the pre-need eligibility form. We are not able to determine eligibility at the local level because so many things apply to the eligibility of a veteran to be buried at a national cemetery. So at this time, I'm going to open up the floor for a couple of questions from you guys. Yes, sir. Oh, ma'am.
Say like, look, in Arkansas, we're going to be buried at National Cemetery. Do we need to get a funeral home here and a funeral home there, or do we just need to get one here and they will handle everything?
So either way,
Repeat the question, please. Can you repeat the question?
can you repeat the questions for everybody here?
If you live in this state and are going to be buried outside in another state, do you need to get a funeral home here and a funeral home there, or do you just need to get a funeral home here?
I would actually suggest you get a funeral home at the state that you wish to be laid to rest in, but it works both ways. What happens is, let's say you go through a funeral home here, they will actually work with a funeral home at the state that you wish to be laid to rest, and they will coordinate everything together so that way you're laid to rest where you wish to be laid to rest at.
Okay, if you get the funeral home there, do we just need to notify someone here and they will contact the funeral home there?
Yes, they will make all the arrangements. But again, I will suggest you work with someone in that state. So it'll be a little bit easier and probably a little bit less expensive if you do it that way.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
What is your role in handling burials at sea?
We don't have any role on handling burials at sea. That's something that goes through the Department of the Navy. You can submit your request to the Department of the Navy and they'll process the request.
Okay.
If I understood you correctly, and you had already made arrangements to be buried not at a national cemetery, then there is the potential eligibility for $300 if you fill out VA
Yes.
Form 21 dash blah, 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 and also the medallion,
That is correct.
and that's it.
Yes. Yes. So there is the potential burial allowance reimbursement for, I don't know your specific situation, but again.
I'm going to die.
All right. I tell everybody, not 50 years from now. But if the veteran passed away from a service-connected disability, is up to $2,000, and if it's not a service-connected disability, is up to $300.
Second question, if you are not buried at a national cemetery, did I understand correctly that if you want military honors, you just notify the funeral home where you expect to
Correct.
go through the process, or your body goes through the process?
Yes. So one thing a lot of families don't know is that there are funeral homes that know the process probably better than me. You have someone that's been doing this for 20, 50 years. They can make all the arrangements for you, including military honors. The military will actually perform military honors at any place or any place that the family wishes for the military to go. That could be church, that could be home, that could be the national cemetery. Anywhere that the family wishes for the military to be present at, the military will show up and perform military honors. You gotta be careful, because if you are entitled to the rifles, some counties don't allow for the rifles to be fired in open streets. So that's something, again, that the funeral home will make all the arrangements. Any other questions?
Yes. You didn't mention the DD Form 214 under eligibility.
Okay. DD Form 214. Okay. It is a required document. But like I said earlier, if for some reason you don't have it at home, you don't have it in your files, we are able to retrieve your documents, discharge documents, from our computer systems. The eligibility office will actually input your social security number into their system, and they will pull your military records. If for some reason it's not coming up in their system, they're able to walk next door and pull the physical copy from the archives. So that's not something that's not having your DD-214 is not going to be something that's going to prevent you from being buried at a national cemetery. Yes, ma'am.
Are spouses buried? Are spouses buried together?
Correct. Correct.
What if one is cremated and one is not?
So the question is, are spouses buried together? Yes. The answer is yes. They will be buried together. The only exception to that is if both are veterans. If you have a marriage and both are veterans, then of course they all qualify for their own gravesite on their own merit. Now, if you're both veterans, you have the option of being together or being side by side. When it comes to, let's say, good question, if one is casket and the other one is cremains. Let's say, for example, the cremains came to us first. So that agreement for burial of cremated remains or cremains, it actually goes over what we will do. So we'll have you sign the form, and what we'll do is when the casket comes to us, let's say 3-5 years after the burial of the cremains, then we will move the cremation into the casket section with that casket, and they will be placed together in the vault. And that is something that we do that often. We do it all the time.
If a spouse predeceases the veteran, has that spouse been registered at the same time that the veteran was registered?
So it's the same process as far as for determining the eligibility of a veteran, the spouse will go through the same process. That's why we require a copy of the marriage certificate. So when the funeral home contacts the scheduling office, that's going to be sent off to them, and they will have a copy of the D-214 of the veteran, and they will create the case for the spouse.
Let me say something real fast here, and I'll get back. What Tony and I do is we are preliminary to what Johan does, okay? And the biggest thing that me and him have found is that when your next of kin come to the cemetery, you come to see me and Tony, okay, or whoever's working that particular day, and you are given the option to say whatever you want to say, and Johan alluded to it, that you have an opportunity to put an emblem of belief on the headstone, which you hadn't seen before now, and you also have the option to have 2 or 3 lines of memory on the headstone, which you hadn't seen now. And you've got, like he said, you've got 3 days, but you're sitting there confronted with me and Tony as to make a decision as to what you want to say on the headstone or what emblem of belief you want to put. The only thing I wanted to do is say, and I'll get back over here to Ronnie for his question, is that sit down and think about what you're going to say on the headstone, what you want, because what you want may be different from what your daughters want. And I'll tell you, last week I had 2 situations where we had 2 families come in, and it just happened to be daughters, okay? I don't know what it is about daughters, but they got into an argument about what's going on the headstone, okay? So, you know, work around that. Think about what you want on your headstone, okay? Not what they want. It's your headstone, all right?
Regrettably, I've gone through this. My wife, previous wife, deceased wife, when she died, we fortunately had almost a year as it was pancreatic cancer. But we did something probably rather unusual. Our son and my then wife and me, we went funeral shopping, okay? Went to about 4 or 5 different funeral homes and made sure that what she wanted, we would make sure happen. And when you do that, another thing that's worthwhile looking at is doing a prepay on your for the funeral home. Not saying that it's going to go up a whole bunch more, but it can. Mine is still there. I'm still under that covenant. I will very much second Johan and Ed and Tony. They all do a very good job. You don't have to do very much. The biggest problem that we had was actually going from the funeral home to the cemetery. We were escorted by police, and they were traveling at speed where the rest of the funeral procession went in various other ways. So we did not have as many as we probably could have. But I was very, very impressed also by the number of people from this organization that came to her funeral service. And I greatly appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Can I piggyback on something? I went and actually paid. I went to a funeral home about a month ago because my dad did it for us. And, you know, you sit down, no pressure. You figure out exactly what you want. The funeral home that I went to does a lot of work with the organization up in Canton. And you know, you sit down and they'll go over the options with you and tell you what it costs, and what you end up doing actually is you buy an insurance policy. You don't actually pay the funeral home, you pay for an insurance policy, and then of course when you pass, that's how that works. Another issue is the reinternment of spouses. When my wife died, I buried her in her hometown because that was where her family plot was and where, she wanted to be. But when the time comes, my plan is to disinter her and move her up to join me up in Canton. And the cost of that right now is about $6,000. So, and that's a cost that you bear. So, there's some things to think about. And again, the good thing about making those decisions in advance is that you don't have to leave it for your kids or your spouse or whatever. You have the opportunity to say what you want, whether you want a police escort from the funeral home to the cemetery or whatever. You make that decision, and your kids. I mean, I don't know about your kids, but my kids, they would break the damn bank to give what they think I want. Well, now they don't have to worry about that. I've already made that decision, and that's how it's going to be. So, it's again, this is not a happy subject, but we're all going to go there at some point. So, you might as well stand up to it and make the decisions and do what you got to do. And as my friend Larry Seal says, that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Okay. George, did you have something?
I'm just curious, what if you're a marriageaholic and you outlive all of your wives? How many get married? What do you
Honk if you've been married to George. No.
Are they stacked together up in a stack, or what do you do?
So,
Just stack them up like cords?
good question, actually, because that does happen. Currently, we do have some sites that are occupied by more than two. It happens. It really does. But let's say if a casket section, as far as a gravesite and a casket section, we can only have two standard size casket, one on top of each other. So if that second, third, or fourth, then at that time of burial, then they will go on the next available gravesite. It won't be right next to the original spouse. It's going to be the available gravesite that is available at that time. Mm-hmm.
I have one. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay, if you want to have your ashes spread from an airplane, contact somebody, or you can call me, and whoever does that needs to be pre-briefed on what happens when you're at 10,000 feet and you open the window.
No. Well, we do a pre-brief also when we scattering the ashes at a scattering garden. So, we always make sure to let the family know that if they wish to spread the ashes, to stay low and face away from the wind. Yes, sir.
Hey, Johan, I wanted to, my wife recently passed away, so I can attest to the fact that what Tony and Ed do, the guys in the organization, they're really very outstanding. And so is everybody that works up there. I've gotten to know Joey and Ray, your director, and I can't say enough on behalf of these men. They are absolutely first rate in every respect. One little detail I thought I'd mention for you to clarify or substantiate. You mentioned about the military honors. There's so much time allotted for these services. Mm-hmm. It's a half hour, and it's actually only about 20 minutes for the service itself. One thing people ought to keep in mind, that if you have that military honors, that takes away from that 20 minutes. So it would only leave maybe 10 minutes for the minister or the clergy to be involved. So that's something that people should take into account before they make that decision. I thought maybe you ought to mention that.
Correct. So 20 minutes, and you'd be amazed how much you can do in 20 minutes. We've had military honors, the minister, a flyby. We unique requests. We tried as best as we can to accommodate, but you also have to keep in mind we have another family right behind your family. But in 20 minutes, military usually takes, depending on the branch of service, I can tell you right now, the Air Force takes longer than all the other branches doing honors. So they usually take about 10 minutes doing military honors. Army, on average, 5 minutes, 5 to 7 minutes. If it's not full honors. Marines, pretty quick also. Navy, pretty quick. But you got keep in mind, even if you go over the 20 minutes that you're being allotted to or given, my guys are instructed not to interrupt. I can always make arrangements for the next family to go to a different pavilion. I can always relocate the military to a different pavilion. So if you do go over 10, 15 minutes, we're going to try to accommodate you as best as we can. Now, when we start getting to an hour and a half, then somebody's going to say respectfully, hey, we have other families. Time's up.
I got just a couple of quickies. I'd like to speak about that insurance policy. Read it carefully because many of them have inflation riders on them, which is really nice. I buried my cousin this year, and I had bought a policy for him for $10,000, and it was worth $11,500 when we buried him. That was nice because that's what the bill was. The other thing is, my cousin's case, his executor died. I was his power of attorney. That ends on the day he died. How do I pay the funeral home with no access and no executor? If you buy an insurance policy, it's done. It's perfect. The other thing I had is my wife and I one day were walking in Arlington Cemetery, and we came on a gravesite of a Navy warrant officer. And there were 2 wives buried on his headstone. I suppose they did that at one time. And of course, my wife looked at me, this is my present wife, and said, forget about it, you're not going to be in a sandwich.
This is not a question, but a word of acknowledgement and honor. Why does Georgia have a national cemetery of, 778 acres?
Yes, sir.
Because of a gentleman by the name of Dallas Hudgens. Dallas Hudgens was a World War II tanker, wounded in the Battle of the Bulge twice, returned to his tank, and fought to the end of the war with that tank crew. Atlanta native, came back to Atlanta. Many of the shopping centers you see around the state of Georgia is because of Dallas Hudgens. The millions that he made, he became a very well-known philanthropist, bought those acres up there, donated it to the federal government, and his son he's deceased, his son told me that one of the hardest things the family ever did was to get the government to accept the 778 acres. It took years, by the way. The reason I'm bringing this up, because Dallas Hudgens, a veteran like all of us, donated those acres, and on the 6th of November, last November, Dallas was inducted into the Georgia Military Veterans Hall of Fame. He is number 137 inducted in the Hall of Fame. So I just want to acknowledge the Hudgens family, Dallas Hudgens, for what he has done for all of us. As far as we can tell, that one veteran has done more personally, financially, out of his own heart than any other veteran in the United States of America for the large cemetery that's up there for all of us. Without him, we don't know where we would be buried for a national cemetery. I just wanted to acknowledge Dallas Hudgens. Thank you.
Just a comment. First, thank you for everything you provided. Many of you, I'm sure, have already done this, but if you haven't, I would urge you to discuss what you want with your children well ahead of time. If you do, number one, it will make it easier for them when the time comes, and whatever you leave in writing can't be misinterpreted, basically. So that's one thing to do. Second thing it's been very positive for my family at least. There's a book that I believe the AARP, I know it's the AARP, puts out. I believe it's answering the other question. The first question is where the babies come from. The second question is, when do you take the keys away from mom and dad? Okay, and it talks about an entire process to use as we age in order to prepare our children for what they're going to do and not get to the point like my wife did with her mother, where her mother said, I'm driving, and she said, Mom, it's not safe for you to drive anymore, and it became testy for a while until Mom crashed into a few things and finally said, well, there's no car to drive, so okay.
Hey, last question. You turned it off, Skip. No, it's not off. It shouldn't be.
Okay, Skip said this was the last question.
Yes, sir.
If the deceased is an Army helicopter pilot that served with the 1st Cav, will you bury their black Stetson with them?
Now, it's a question because so
I was kidding.
Well, that's a good question because we do get families who like ball cap, Navy ball cap, Marine uniform. We wish for dad or mom, if mom was a veteran, to be buried with, their ball cap or their uniform. We can do that. We can do that.
I'm being buried with my Stetson.
We can do that. Dog tags, we place dog tags in the gravesite or on top of the caskets. Hey, I really want these flowers to be lower with the caskets. We do that also. Again, unique requests. If we can accommodate them, we will do them. We try to say yes to a lot of the requests from the family, and if we can't say yes, then we'll give you an option. That's why we have the scores that we have on those surveys. Honestly, we don't like saying no. I don't like saying no. If I can find a way to do it, then I'll find a way to do it. If I couldn't do it, then that came from above. But I always try to get it done. I always try to get it done. Whatever the request is, we always strive to get it done for the family and the veteran, because that's an important day. That's something that they're going to remember for the rest of their lives. And we have this thing that we say with the National Cemetery Administration, you only get one chance to get it right. Only one chance to get it right. So if we can accommodate that request, then we're going to do it. We're going to do it.
Okay.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
And this, Johan, you did good, bud. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.